Robber breaks into restaurant, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. The man charged in without hesitation. The owner shouted, "Sir, we're closed." But that didn't seem to be the stranger's main concern. It seems the man had sinister intentions. The owner turned and ran back as she screamed. Daniel had only come to enjoy his meal, but now he was interrupted. He rose to his feet and got the man's attention. He was wearing a hoodie, he was clearly there to rob them, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. Daniel Fisher had the same routine at the end of each day. After getting out of the studio, it was always already dark. But only one thing would be on his mind, food. He would always be starving after all that exercise. He'd change into his casual clothes, say goodbye to his instructor, and walk out of the door to the street. He'd normally try to find any restaurants that were still open at 9 p.m. at night. Daniel Fisher was an ordinary guy that would always do the right thing, or at least he would like to think he would. He was raised well by his parents and taught good moral values at a young age. He was always grateful to his parents for making him the man he was today. He worked as a delivery driver, spending 9 hours a day dropping off packages to people who'd ordered them. But he did also have a hobby that other people often questioned. When Daniel tried to tell any of his friends about his hobby, they always laughed in his face. He tried to explain the martial art he had taken up, but they always had the same retort, "But that sounds just like karate." Karate is often ridiculed since so many people do it recreationally. It's easy to be a brown belt. Just about anyone could get one. But what Daniel did was far more extreme than karate. And he would soon put it to good use. Daniel practiced a more specialized martial art. It was oftentimes controversial to the people that actually knew what it was. It required more dedication than a lot of other martial arts and was used by some of the most extreme armies in the world. He only did it because he felt that it was like a kind of therapy. He never actually expected to have to use what he had learned on someone, but he wouldn't have a choice one evening. Every day after he made his last delivery, Daniel would head over to a dojo near his house. He would greet his instructor and get started. He was learning krav maga, the martial art that they teach in the Israeli Defense Force. It takes a lot of techniques from different martial arts and combines them for a much more effective and extreme self-defense. Something he would learn very soon. Daniel would train at the dojo every night until 9 p.m. and by then, he was always hungry. He didn't really have the energy to cook by then, so he normally just got himself a small meal at any place that was open. One night, he spotted a lady about to close the doors of her small restaurant. He waved at her and said, "You closing?" She smiled and replied, "You hungry, son?" The woman made an exception and let Daniel have a quick meal. He was overwhelmed with emotion. No one had ever been so kind. He looked around the restaurant, it was dark, and all of the tables had chairs packed on top of them. He chose an item from the menu, and the kind lady walked back into the kitchen to get started on it. He took one of the chairs off of the tables and sat down. It felt lonely when he was the only patron. The woman came out of the kitchen with a hot plate full of food. He thanked her before she walked back to the kitchen. He enjoyed a hot meal at the front of the restaurant while she cleaned dishes in the kitchen. Daniel was tired from his long training session, but the food brought the energy back into his muscles. But he had no idea it was going to be interrupted by a sinister figure. He thought about how he could repay the woman for being so kind. He would give her a great tip, but he had no idea that he was going to do something a lot more important. He cleaned his plate and enjoyed the glass of water he had on his table. But then he noticed someone else coming towards the door. The woman rushed past him to presumably let him know they were closed. But what happened next changed everything. The man charged in without hesitation. The owner shouted, "Sir, we're closed." But that didn't seem to be the stranger's main concern. It seems the man had sinister intentions. The owner turned and ran back as she screamed. Daniel had only come to enjoy his meal, but now he was interrupted. He rose to his feet and got the man's attention. He was wearing a hoodie, he was clearly there to rob them, but he had no idea who he was dealing with. The robber oozed confidence, but he obviously didn't know Daniel. Just a block away was the dojo where he trained every day. If he knew that that's where he had come from, he would have given this robbery a little more thought. Daniel saw he had an object in his pocket, but he wouldn't let him even get a chance to get it out. He rushed the robber and tackled him to the ground. The robber didn't stand a chance, he may have had a weapon in his pocket, but it didn't matter when Daniel had tempered his body as a weapon. He pinned him until the police arrived 10 minutes later. The cops were quick to take over where Daniel started. They dragged the robber away and congratulated him on a job well done. Daniel didn't feel like he needed to be thanked. He was just doing what anyone else would have. He wouldn't let a robber get away with anything. It was the least he could do for the lady who had given him a meal. He made sure the restaurant owner was okay, made sure to pay for his meal, and then went on his way. The police didn't even ask for a statement. It was clear they knew what he had done was right. But he had no idea what would come next. Daniel's head hit his pillow quickly once he got back home. He wanted to forget about the day's events. But he had no idea that someone else would make sure they would always be remembered. The next morning, he heard a knock on his door. It was a government official telling him that he'd be awarded a medal from the mayor for his deed.